if you can use those labels or whatever it is. But you, Canadian gun rights, the Liberals rolled it back recently, and now even more things are restricted. You think that's good? You think we should?
Well, again, like most things, it's complicated.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm certainly not opposed.
That's a good political answer.
Well, I'm not opposed to people owning guns, but I don't. What I have a bit more trouble getting behind is I don't understand the rationale for owning an assault weapon, for example.
Yeah.
Like to have the equivalent of an AK-47 in your house, like, what exactly is the point of that?
I'll go show you mine later.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure you have a whole stash. So I used to live. I don't know if I told you this before, Kyle, but I used to.
U.S.
I used to live in Mississippi.
Yeah.
Right, for 4 years, and it was a funny story. So I lived there for 4 years, and I came back to Canada to go to medical school. I met Sherry, my wife, in medical school, and I think it was towards the end of medical school. I went down to Mississippi to go to the wedding of my friend John, and Sherry came with me, and we flew into Memphis, Tennessee. And I used to live in Tupelo, the birthplace of Elvis, about 90 miles southeast of Memphis. So we flew into Memphis, rented a car, and then we drove out of Memphis into rural Mississippi.
Yeah.
And we were following this pickup truck, which had a gun rack in the back window with a gun in it, some kind of rifle, and 2 bumper stickers. And the one bumper sticker said, "I love assault weapons," and the other bumper sticker said, "We'll kill for ammo." And Sherry looked at me and said, "What are we doing here?" It was just so classic of the gun culture in the United States, right? And as Canadians tend to have this stereotype of the U.S. as guns on every corner and school shootings every day. It's not really the reality. I lived in the U.S. for a total of 5 years in different places. Living in the U.S. is pretty much like living in Canada, except in general it's warmer, and you get to keep more of your money. So your taxes are a lot lower. Yeah. Right, but
just side note question there: is it harder for Canada to retain doctors for that reason? That in the U.S. the lower taxes and you probably get paid more in the U.S. as well as a doctor, I'm assuming.
Yeah, but the environment to practice medicine in the United States is quite different from a litigation standpoint. So, So my wife is an obstetrician. Practicing obstetrics in a U.S. state, your malpractice costs are several $100,000 a year.
Oh, okay.
Right, so it's a much more litigious environment, and it's also much more corporate, particularly these days. So the complaints that physicians have in the U.S. are different than the
you can get sued more and stuff like that.
So it's a different pasture.
Fair enough.
But it has its own problems.
Go back to our gun chat.
Yeah. So obviously there's a gun issue in the United States when people can walk into a school and spray bullets and kill children, or set up in a hotel in Las Vegas and mow down, pedestrians on the Las Vegas Strip, that kind of thing. So clearly there's a gun culture problem, and as I say in the book, people will say, well, it's not the guns, it's the people. Well, sure. I mean, people fire the guns. It's just, and the analogy I draw is with pit bulls. And I have a chapter on pit bulls too, right? And people say it's not the pit bull, it's the owner. Well, sure, but it's like having an assault weapon, right? The only thing you change about gun culture in the United States is if you banned assault weapons, the rate of death from gun violence would plummet.
Isn't that okay? I we can get more into this, but we don't have time. What do you think? I just have one question though. What do you think about how a lot of countries that go towards like government controlling everything, one of the first things they start doing is like restricting the guns, and nobody has guns anymore. You can't defend yourself. And of course, the U.S. has the Second Amendment of like fighting against that idea that the government can take over control. You see that? Do you think about that at all? Like in the history, if you think of the history of countries that have gone towards like communism or like the high control of the government, and the guns being taken away, do you think about that as Canada goes more and more that way and becomes more and more controlling in its government?
What do you mean? You mean if you restrict firearms ownership, that gives government more control and takes away citizens' ability to...
Like in Australia and New Zealand now, they're banning machetes. Like it's just like they just keep going. Like
Yeah. Well, do you think there's evidence for that? Like in countries, like say Scandinavian countries, where there are where citizens don't generally own guns. Do you think the citizens in those countries don't have the ability to push back against government, or there's some kind of conspiracy on the part of government to control their citizens? And
I don't know if there's I don't know if there's as much a conspiracy, but as a fact that it's easier to control your citizens when they have less and less of their own, like ability to fight back.
Yeah.
Like if you think if China allowed, their people to have guns, it would be a lot different probably in how their ability to control their people.
You think?
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, sure. I mean, China is one example, right? Obviously, authoritarian communist country, but there are many other countries, liberal democracies throughout Europe and so on, where gun ownership is much more regulated than it is in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is I mean, the ability to walk into a store and buy a loaf of bread and then a rifle, an automatic rifle is I wouldn't vouch for at all. I think there should be good, background checks and understandings. And hard to buy a rifle and not just go to a gun show and be able to, pick up anything. I think that's the bigger problem.
Yeah. But people should be allowed, with proper background checks and so on. People should be allowed to own rifles and handguns and that sort of thing. I'm not opposed to that at all.
Yeah.
I guess where I come down on this issue is, why do people need to own assault weapons, and why do you have a society where there are not proper background checks for people buying weapons, right? So we don't allow people to buy grenades. Mm-hmm. We don't allow people to buy nuclear weapons.
Yeah, grenades would be kind of fun, but
yeah, sure, but we don't generally allow people to buy grenades for obvious safety reasons.
Yeah. Okay. Hey guys, if you enjoyed that episode and were blessed by it, would you be willing to support the show? That would help a lot in creating more content, improving the quality of the content, putting the production value, getting more guests on, and me being able to spend more time and energy towards it. So if you're interested in doing that, you can click up here and it'll take you to a support page. But you can also subscribe to the podcast by clicking over here and doing that. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.